to abolish the laws that are no longer relevant with current times.
Penambahbaikan ini juga akan menjamin kesejahteraan keluarga Malaysia. Sebagai contoh, teknologi digital hari ini semakin pesat membangun. Dalam konteks ini, undang-undang yang sedia ada tidak relevan dengan ledakan teknologi digital, bahkan agak terkebelakang dengan perubahan semasa.
He said this in his speech at Universiti Malaya, UM's Faculty of Law Golden Jubilee celebration in Kuala Lumpur on Friday. Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri also said the government has implemented several proactive measures to strengthen laws in the country, including the proposed bill on anti-party hopping and political funding, and the move to abolish the mandatory death sentence. He also announced an allocation of 1 million ringgit for the setting up of the Tan Sri Ahmad Ibrahim Foundation, which will provide legal services to members of the Keluarga Malaysia who are unable to afford legal representation. Also present at the event were Chief Justice Tun Tengku Maimun Tuan Mat, UM Vice-Chancellor Professor Datuk Dr. Muhammad Hamdi Abdul Syukur, and UM Faculty of Law Dean Associate Professor Dr. Johan Shamsuddin Sabaruddin. Foreign investment into Malaysia recorded net inflows of 48.1 billion ringgit in 2021 compared to 13.3 billion ringgit in the previous year. It is the highest since 2016, making registered FDI of 788.8 billion ringgit as at the end of 2021. The manufacturing sector expanded to record net inflows of 29.5 billion ringgit, which attributed to the flows in FDI, followed by the services sector, especially in financial activities, and the mining sector involving equity and investment funds shares. The Asia region continued to be the top source of FDI in Malaysia, with net inflows of 22.5 billion ringgit, mostly from Singapore, Japan and South Korea. Meanwhile, total trade in Malaysia surpassed 1 trillion ringgit in just 5 months this year, the shortest period to breach this milestone. Trade, exports, imports and trade surplus also registered the highest value for the period. Senior Minister of International Trade and Industry, Datuk Seri Muhammad Azmi Ali, said Malaysia's trade performance in May remained resilient, recording the fastest growth since November last year. Exports, meanwhile, jumped by 23% to 592 billion ringgit in the first 5 months, while imports leapt by 27%. This has resulted in a trade climb by 25% to more than 1 trillion ringgit. Trade surplus also edged up by 9% to 101 billion ringgit. The export growth was driven by higher demand for electrical and electronics, petroleum, as well as palm oil and palm oil-based agriculture products. The FDI and trade figures are showing that things are picking up in Malaysia as the nation shifts into the endemic phase of COVID-19, with the nation remaining an attractive investment destination for global investors.
What we need to understand, of course, is that the figures for 2021 have to be viewed in the context of the figures for 2020, which was a very bad year for everybody because of the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns which held back investment right around the world. And so this is a bit of a rebound in that regard. And nonetheless, it is very, very good news overall. The amount of money that is being invested in Malaysia has increased very significantly from around 13.3 billion ringgit to 48.1 billion ringgit. And the amount of money that Malaysians are investing overseas.
This will stand the nation in good stead to capture more economic opportunities.
And this is very good because it shows that there is demand for Malaysian products overseas, for Malaysian companies that are exporting, but it also shows that there is an increase in activities for Malaysian companies here at home because they are now buying products from overseas which they will use in production, in the things that they are making and selling here in the domestic market, and that's also quite a positive indicator that things are picking up. Although we should note that the overall trade figures, taking exports and imports together, have contracted by more than 8%. But having said that, the overall number is positive. we are still in a period where we are recovering, and to have this type of recovery so quickly is really very good news.
Despite expectations of strong growth in trade performance in 2022, the aggressive U.S. interest rate hikes should also be taken into account.
We have seen an increase in interest rates in the United States, in particular 0.75%, and we are expecting increases in interest rates around other major markets, particularly in Europe. We also have some significant constraints on growth in China, which is a major market for Malaysia. These headwinds have to be taken into account when we're looking at the future projection for trade. And we do expect that overall global trade will contract, and there are some indicators from the IMF, for example, that we might be heading to a global recession. And that has to be taken into account when we think about what's going to happen in the future. But for the moment, I think that the data is very positive.
The ban on chicken exports imposed by the government since June 1st is only a temporary measure to stabilise the supply of chicken for domestic consumption. Domestic Trade and Consumer Affairs Minister Datuk Seri Alexander Nantalinggi said, however, no time frame has been set for the lifting of the ban as the country is still facing a shortage of chicken supply in the market due to the rising cost of chicken feed.
Keputusan ini, ketetapan ini dibuat untuk menangani masalah kekurangan bekalan ayam domestik dalam pasaran tempatan kita. Jadi apabila industri ini pulih nanti, mereka dah dapat mengeluarkan ayam dan untuk kegunaan domestik kita tidak ada masalah, tidak ada gangguan bekalan. Yang mereka keluar lebihan tu, kerajaan akan biarkan dia ekspor semula lah.
In the meantime, he also reminded poultry players, wholesalers and retailers not to take advantage of the floating price system, which will start on July 1st, following the end of the maximum retail price scheme by raising the price of chickens too steeply. Datuk Seri Nanta also stressed that the government will not hesitate to take stern action against errant traders involved in profiteering activities. Prior to the ban, Malaysia exported about 3.6 million chickens a month. Meanwhile, the Federation of Livestock Farmers Associations of Malaysia, FLFAM, said chicken prices are expected to exceed 10 ringgit per kilogram following the end of the maximum price scheme and subsidy for chicken breeders on June 30th. Its advisor, Datuk Jeffrey Ng, said the termination of both government incentives will result in the overall costs borne by chicken breeders to reach over 7 ringgit per kilogram, in line with the rising prices of chicken feed.
Harga RM8.90, dia tertakluk kepada harga ladang RM5.60. Ex ladang tu RM5.60. Kalau kita tengok kan RM5.60 ni, kalau paksa kita ternak ayam untuk RM5.60, semua akan gulung tikai. Kita cakap kan harga dedak hari ini. Harga dedak hari ini satu beg lebih kurang RM130. Paling murah. Kalau satu kilo lebih kurang RM2.60. Cuma dedak aja tu. Dedak saja untuk kita. Kalau kita kira 1.7 kilo untuk 1 kilo ayam, dah RM4 lebih. Anak ayam yang kita beli hari ini adalah satu ekor anak ayam RM2.30 sampai RM2.40.
He added that aside from this, other operational costs include wages, vaccinations and electricity, which the chicken breeders would not be able to afford if they maintain the present pricing without subsidies. He also said that the FLFAM is hoping to have a meeting with the government soon to discuss the issue and seek a win-win situation so that consumers too would not be burdened by the pricing. Kuala Lumpur Police have opened an investigation paper into the Walk for Judicial Independence gathering organised by the Malaysian Bar. Dang Wangi District Police Chief Assistant Commissioner Nur Delhan Yahaya said the investigations are being conducted under the Peaceful Assembly Act 2012. Also, the prevention and control of infectious diseases, measures within infected local areas, National Recovery Plan, Transition Phase to Endemic Regulations 2022. Rule 6 of the regulations prohibits processions, while Rule 7 involves limiting gatherings. He said everyone involved in the assembly would be summoned to the Dangwangi District Police Headquarters soon to have their statements recorded. He said their checks showed that the gathering was held between 9 a.m. and 11:22 a.m. at the Padang Merbok car park today. He said based on observation, about 220 people from the Bar Council as well as other personalities had gathered at the location for the assembly. It is understood to be the fourth such event organised by the Malaysian Bar since 2007. The assembly was held following the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission MACC's probe into Judge Datuk Muhammad Nazlan Muhammad Ghazali, who oversaw the SRC International Sdn Bhd corruption trial. More local news later in the Buletin, but first, after this breather, Israeli forces kill another 3 Palestinians. Don't go away. Israeli forces have shot dead another 3 Palestinians and wounded 10 others on Friday during a military operation in the occupied West Bank. About 30 Israeli military vehicles raided the city of Jenin in the early hours and opened fire at a car in Al-Marah area in the east of the city, firing shots at 4 men sitting inside. The shooting resulted in the deaths of 3, namely Bara Lahlu, Yusuf Salah and Laith Abu Surur. The Israeli army in a statement said it was conducting an operation to locate weapons from 2 different locations and that they had been fired upon. However, residents in Jenin suspected the Israelis had intended to demolish the home of Raid Hazim, who carried out a shooting attack on April 7th. It was reported that the Israeli army has ramped up raids in and around the occupied Jenin camp in an attempt to crack down on growing Palestinian armed resistance there. Over in India, authorities imposed restrictions on Friday on gatherings in New Delhi as 1 person was killed after protests against a new military recruitment process spread. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government unveiled the new recruitment system this week called Agnipath, or Path of Fire in Hindi, triggering turmoil with police firing into the air to break up stone-throwing crowds and the torching of railway infrastructure. The system aims to bring in more people to the military on short 4-year contracts to lower the average age of India's 1.38 million strong armed forces and cut down on burgeoning pension costs. However, many potential recruits object, concerned about employment opportunities after serving their 4-year term and disappointed to miss out on a pension. Meanwhile, thousands of young men took to the streets on Friday, with protests turning violent in at least 3 states. The European Commission has recommended Friday that Ukraine should be granted European Union candidate status, a first step on the long road towards membership for the war-torn country. EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen said the recommendation was on understanding that Ukraine carries out a number of reforms, adding that the country has clearly demonstrated the country's aspiration and the country's determination to live up to European values and standards. The recommendation, which comes a day after 4 European Union leaders vowed to back Kyiv's candidacy, will be discussed by leaders of the 27-nation bloc during a summit next week in Brussels. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the decision will help Kyiv in defeating Russia's invasion.
Ukraine, that has it in their hands.
Thailand on Friday announced all travellers will no longer be required to apply for a Thailand pass or purchase travel insurance to enter the country from July 1st. However, travellers will still need to show proof of COVID-19 vaccination or a negative COVID-19 test result before departure. Meanwhile, masks will still be recommended for the general public but will not be compulsory outdoors unless the area is crowded or not well ventilated. People can remove their masks while carrying out certain activities such as eating, exercising, receiving care or service involving facial areas, as well as performing arts. As for indoor environments, masks will continue to be required. A date for the change in mask policy, along with other recommended changes to regulations, is likely to be announced in the Royal Gazette, which could be published shortly after the Cabinet meeting next week.
About what's going on here tonight, and everyone has the same thought in their head, just hoping that those people who were injured are released.
Welcome back. Now on to sports. Badminton, the 2022 Indonesia Open. National top shuttler Lee Zijia was dragged to a 3-set battle before claiming his berth in the semi-finals on Friday night. Facing Loh Kien Yew of Singapore, Lee had a good start, taking the first set 21-18. Loh, however, bounced back to claim the second set 21-16. The 6th-seeded Lee then regained his momentum to seal a spot in the last 4 with a 22-20 victory in the decider. Joining Lee were national doubles Aaron Chia, So Hui Yip. The duo was also forced to battle hard before clinching a 14-21, 21-12, 22-20 win over Indonesian pair Pramudya Kusuma Wardana, Yeremia Eric Yok Yaakob Rambitan. Turning to basketball now. The Golden State Warriors are NBA champions once again, topping the Boston Celtics 103-90 for their fourth title in the last 8 seasons. Stephen Curry scored 34 points for the Warriors, who claimed the franchise's 7th championship overall. And this one completed a journey like none other after a run of 5 consecutive finals, then a plummet to the bottom of the NBA, and now a return to greatness just 2 seasons after having the league's worst record. The trophy was also the 4th for Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green and Andre Iguodala. The first 3 rings came in 2015, 2017 and 2018 when Golden State was dynastic and made 5 consecutive trips to the finals. Warriors' victory also denied what would have been Celtics' record 18th championship, one that would have allowed Boston to break a tie with the Los Angeles Lakers for the most in league history.
And that'll do it. It's over. The Golden
Four individuals, including a manager of a government-linked property company, were arrested by the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission (MACC) after being suspected of embezzling money from a project worth 300 million ringgit. All the suspects are now remanded for 6 days to assist in the investigation. Sources said the suspect was suspected of abetting by making false claims related to development projects in the East Coast. The other 3 individuals detained by the MACC were project managers, managing directors and architects from contractor companies and consultants. All those detained were between 28 and 48 years old. 3 of them were detained at the Terengganu MACC office, while another was detained at his home in the federal capital at 12 noon on Thursday. The remand order was granted by Magistrate Nur Mazrini Mahmud at the Kuala Terengganu Magistrates Court on Friday afternoon. The Senior Director of MACC's Investigation Division, Datuk Sri Hishamuddin Hashim, confirmed the arrest of the 4 individuals but declined to comment further. In other news, 8 bank accounts owned by Malaysian Immigration Department officers were frozen after being suspected of being used for transfer of corruption involving over 700,000 ringgit. Probe was conducted at the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission (MACC) headquarters and continued since the operation started last Monday. MACC in a statement on Friday said so far 7 immigration officers have been reported to have been detained. Also detained were 2 individuals who are also owners of the company who are suspected of giving bribe to the immigration officers involved. The MACC recently found an additional 38,000 ringgit, which was suspected to be used to bribe the immigration officers who were being held. This was in addition to more than 700,000 ringgit, which was confiscated by the MACC last Tuesday. 7 immigration officers were among 9 individuals detained to facilitate probe into the case, which reportedly took place between 2019 and 2021. It was learned that the immigration officers were said to have been bribed over the recruitment of foreign workers. In Pulau Pinang, a chase between the police and a Volkswagen Passat in Nibong Tebal on Friday ended with a man's arrest and the discovery of a large heroin stash in the vehicle. State Narcotics Criminal Investigation Department and CID Chief Assistant Commissioner Muhammad Syukairi Abdul Sabhi said 2 more men were later nabbed following the drug bust. According to Muhammad Syukairi, a team of policemen in a patrol car had noticed the Passat being driven in a suspicious manner along Jalan Besar and decided to pull the vehicle over. However, the driver, a 36-year-old fisherman, tried to speed away instead.
Mengejar pelaku lebih kurang dalam jarak 200 meter bila kita mengesan kereta ini dan kita cuba menahan dan suspek cuba melarikan diri dan terpapas di sebelah kiri jalan dan kita telah lock kawasan tersebut dan suspek gagallah untuk meloloskan diri daripada tahanan.
Authorities then checked the vehicle and found 9.03 kilograms of heroin worth about 130,000 ringgit. Cops believe that the suspect, who has been active in the drug trade since the start of the year, was on his way to traffic the drugs. Following the arrest, police conducted 2 raids at a house in Kuala Kurau, Perak and an open area in Nibong Tebal and detained a 53-year-old fish breeder and 34-year-old fisherman at both locations respectively. Police also seized 50,000 ringgit cash and a car worth 80,000 ringgit. All the suspects who had criminal records and tested positive for drugs have been remanded to assist investigations under the Dangerous Drugs Act. Kuala Kangsar Sessions Court on Friday ordered a man who ran amok on the North-South Expressway NSE in Kuala Kangsar to be referred to Hospital Bahagia Ulu Kinta for 30 days of psychiatric evaluation and observation. The order was issued by Judge Rohaida Ishaq against 36-year-old Zainordin Muhammad after allowing the prosecution's request on the matter. According to the prosecution, Zainordin was in an unsound state of mind during his remand period and needed to be evaluated and observed at the hospital. The accused had pleaded guilty to 3 charges for causing mischief by kicking the side mirror of a car, obstructing other motorists when he stopped his Toyota Vios in the right lane at the Kuala Kangsar stretch of the highway on June 12, and lastly for using drugs at the Kuala Kangsar Police Headquarters on June 14th. During the proceedings, Zainordin was also seen talking to himself, acting irrationally before he was asked to calm himself down. The court set July 14th for case mention. That's all for Nightline this time around. A 240-meter glass bridge over the Dashbashi Canyon with a diamond-shaped cafe in the middle has been opened to visitors in southern Georgia. One of the main attractions is the diamond-shaped cafe in the middle of the bridge. It is built at an altitude of 200 meters. With that, I'm Nadia Azmi. Thank you for tuning in and stay safe.